Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again today. It's nice to see you all, even though we're on Zoom. We'll pretend we're together in a nice room, having a chance to chat and catch up. But we're doing the best we can using technology today. So we're so glad that you joined us for our presentation of the power of disability media. This is our continued series of building momentum for the Canadian disability benefit, and we're glad that you've been able to be a part of it. A couple of notes to help you enjoy this participation as much as possible. We're pleased to have the webinar feature French-English translation, ASL interpretation, LSQ, closed captioning English, and plain language. In order to access these features, there's a few pieces of tech that you can set up. The first and most important is please choose your language that you would like to hear the webinar in. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see an icon that says interpretation. If you'd like to hear this presentation in English, please choose English. If French, please choose French. For those of you who are using screen readers, we understand that there is not yet a shortcut key, but if you press tab enough times, I understand that it will bring you to the interpretation. It's important that each person chooses a language. If it remains in the off, which is the default presentation, you will not hear the French or English. So at this point, please choose either French or English to hear the presentation in. We also recommend that you watch the webinar in speaker view. On the slide, you'll see how to switch from speaker to gallery view. When you watch the presentation in speaker view, you'll see the main speaker plus the ASL interpreter and the LSQ interpreter. We will be doing all of that automatically, and so we do suggest that for the duration of the webinar, you watch in speaker view. We've also understood that sometimes the chat box gets in the way of listening to the presentation, and we're sorry about that's the way that it's set up. In your audio settings and accessibility, there is a way to turn off the in-meeting chat notification. So if that's something that will get in your way of enjoying the presentation, we suggest that you do that as well. So again, we'd like you to choose your language, French or English. Switch to speaker view to see the ASL and LSQ interpreters. Check your accessibility options if that's something that's important to you. And in that way, you'll be able to enjoy all of the accessibility that's offered. So at this point, I'm very pleased to welcome you back. We have several special guests that are going to be joining us today. Rabia and Jonathan are back. We're very pleased to have Mariepierre with us, who will be sharing some poetry. We also have Delyse Sylvester with us, Aaron and Liz, who will be doing the plain language, and so glad to have May and Ziv, who's going to be sharing part of her story and the work that she's doing. So again, we're really pleased to have you here with us. Thanks for being a part of the ongoing learning series. And at this point, I'm going to invite Rabia to welcome everyone and give us some context for why we're gathered today.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. First and foremost, I am very grateful to our Indigenous, First Nations, and Métis ancestors for allowing us to share in the blessings that this land has to offer, in sharing this environment with us so generously, and for teaching us how to share. I acknowledge that these are the traditional lands of the ancestors, the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. I am situated in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, the traditional territories, most recently of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. In the spirit of equity and justice, we have endeavored in this journey to learn together through a series of opportunities brought to us to bring us together if we have access to technology as a result of this pandemic. This is one of the blessings or opportunities that we have seized to bring our voices together from sea to sea to sea. Thank you again for joining us in this series, those of you that have continued the learning with us since October, and those of you that might be joining us for the first time. My name is Rabia Khadir. I identify myself as a hyphen with many hijabs. I'm a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian, woman, wife, mother, advocate, activist, sibling of individuals with disabilities, daughter of aging parents, and I happen to have a disability. I am blind. I am using some assistive technology to help me out today. I'm a JAWS user, in fact. I am the CEO of Dean Support Services and a member of the Board of Directors of Accessibility Standards Canada, as well as the COVID Disability Advisory Group advising Minister Qualtrough, and many other fingers that I have in different pies to voice the needs of people with disabilities who cannot voice for themselves or who do not have the same opportunities that I am grateful to have to be able to voice. What I would like to start off today's session with, it's a reflection that I have been mulling over for quite some time now. In fact, there is a TED Talk by an academic from Europe, originally of African descent, from one of the African nations, a Black woman who beautifully talked about the danger of a single story. There is indeed a danger in stereotyping, prejudging, or assessing with bias. However, there is power also in narrating a single story. And I think it is time that we develop and leverage the power of a single story to establish a universal movement. It is in fact proven to be successful, that when we can narrate a particular story of a diaspora, of a group, and we can package that story, it is very powerful to politically market, to socially market, and to economically leverage. The disability community exists as a notion often, but has no shape, no form. It is time that we define its shape and form collectively through these discussions and through those conversations beyond these discussions that are happening in this fabulous country that we all call home. We need to identify a single story common to the experience of every Canadian from coast to coast to coast living with a disability. This single story transcends the differences of race, of religion, of gender, of age, of language, of ability, of geography, and all else that defines us as unique individuals. Except for the fact that we indeed have a disability, a lived experience of disability. The type of disability we have is irrelevant to this single story. We must determine the single story as a story of financial barriers, of lived experience and democracy, to galvanize a national movement backed by a real solid disability community. Today's theme of the power of media is really important. Galvanizing the tool of media, of disability media, in all its forms is critical in telling this story. It's time to share a common story and to tell and retell it so that people, in fact, start listening. Thank you. I'm looking forward to today's webinar. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Rabia, for reminding us of why it's important that we have this conversation and the work that we're doing to build momentum for Canada Disability Benefit that will make such an incredible impact in the lives of all people with disabilities across the country. So thank you, Rabia, for your leadership in this work. Now it's my privilege to be able to welcome Mariepierre. Mariepierre will be sharing a poem with us, and Mariepierre will introduce yourself, but thank you so much for being here and for sharing. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks a lot for the invitation. So my name is Mariepierre. I'm from Montreal. I'm a literature teacher and also a spoken word artist and a mother of 2 teenagers. And my younger daughter has a severe intellectual disability. She's 14 right now. Her name is Roman. And this is a poem I wrote to her. I have to say that I'm used to say my poetry from different audiences, but this one is very special to me, so I'm a little bit nervous, but here it goes. Quel est ton nom, ma belle, ma douce? Quel est le nom qui te ressemble? Dans les papiers officiels, on te dit déficiente ou handicapée, et certains débattent pour l'emploi d'un de ces termes plutôt que l'autre. Autrefois, on aurait probablement écrit idiote ou débile, arriéré, demeuré. Je les entends, ces mots. Je les entends. Moi, je te nomme papillon. Petit chat, petit lapin, petit poisson, petite, oui, toujours. Je t'enveloppe de mots caresses pour arrondir les angles de ta différence. Je t'abreuve de mots tendresse pour noyer les épithètes dissonantes. Souvent, on me demande de te définir. On veut des diagnostics, des précisions scientifiques. Épileptique, oui, mais encore, syndrome de West, d'accord, mais le reste, un chromosome défectueux, discordance génétique, intéressant, voilà qui explique. Qui n'explique rien du tout. Qui ne dit rien de l'enfant que tu es, de tes intenses frustrations, de tes joies débordantes, rien de ta vie qui tangue au fil des jours, déroulant sa pelote, beau temps, mauvais temps. Rien de tes crises de rire, de larmes, de tes jeux, de tes réveils, de tes paresses. Rien du train-train quotidien et de ces longs wagons de monotonie. Dans les papiers officiels, on te dit déficiente ou handicapée. Souvent, on me demande de te définir, de t'encadrer dans des mots valises qui ferment mal. Moi, je me raccroche à ton prénom. Romane. Sa chatouille, le palais vient s'enrouler contre la langue et se termine doucement en une petite touche contre les dents. C'est comme une boucle dans la bouche, un joli nœud dans le destin. Dans Romane, c'est vrai, il y a arme. Celle peut-être que l'on porte, toi et moi, pour affronter les vents mauvais, pour faire face, comme on dit, à cette chienne de vie. Dans Romane, bien sûr, il y a mort, comme au bout de tous nos chemins, au terme de tous nos espoirs. Mais dans Romane, surtout, il y a âme. Et moi, l'athée, je vois la tienne au fond de tes yeux doux. Petit chat, petit poisson, ma romanilou d'amour. Autour de ton prénom, voilà que je trace un poème de sein fragile, encre de Chine. Si je t'appelle, viendras-tu? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariepierre, for sharing that with us. I'm
My
just
pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I have a short story to tell you, Mariepierre, that I haven't let you know yet. Last evening, when you sent us the text for your poem, I wanted everyone to be able to hear the sentiment and what you were writing about. So I called my friend Rochelle, who I know is an English speaker and a French speaker, and I said, can you help with this? Because I wanted not just a straight translation, but someone to be able to pick up on all of the imagery, what you did. And so Rochelle helped us with the translation. Thank you, Rochelle. And
Yeah, thanks.
the miracle part about this is Rochelle is mom to Nicholas, and Nicholas has the same West syndrome as your Ramon.
Wow.
I cried, and I'll introduce you to each other because I think that it will be such a deep connection. But Rochelle would say the same, and just what you shared, and so special. And thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mariepierre. As you can see from what we experienced, hearing the stories and hearing the experiences of people is more powerful than anything that I can imagine. And today we are so lucky and blessed to have our friend Delyse Sylvester with us. Delyse has very strong ideas and insight into media and influence and stories. And I know that since I spoke with her a few weeks ago, I haven't stopped thinking about some of these ideas, and I know that you will have the same experience. So Delyse, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I want to thank Mariepierre for just such a moving, centering poem. And to Rabia, who you've really created the excellent framing and really kind of summarized really what the presentation is today about a disability movement media. And I also want to thank everyone for Plan and all the people and organizations that have put this series together. It's just phenomenal. Look at this, almost 140 people gathered today. So it's very exciting. I also want to take a moment just to thank two mentors of mine who are likely in the audience, Alan Mansky and Vicky Kamak. Heartfelt gratitude to you both. You've been an inspiration, and so much of what's in this presentation really has been inspired by both of you. And I want to thank everyone for joining this session, and I hope we can explore together some of what the disability movement media force is, so that you can bring social, political, moral, and economic power to bear on the Canadian disability benefit and other areas, other policies to generate popular support, shift the boundaries of what is socially acceptable, and encourage political boldness. So I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen and the presentation. Okay. So Rebecca, I'm going to take the 20 minutes, and if you need me to do less, please just let me know, and I'll work on moving quicker through it.
You're good. Take your time, Delyse. Thank you.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'm joining you from Nelson, British Columbia, which is the traditional territory of the Sinixt and the Ktunaxa. And I identify as a her and she, and a long list of identifiers as a mother, and especially right now as a grandmother and an elder. 3 new babies in my life, grandchildren, which are making me, as Rebecca said, even more determined for the change that we're seeking, the social change that we're seeking. So I have been in communications in support of the social change movement for 35 years. You can see the gray hairs. Well before the internet went public 20 years ago. And it was halfway through these years that Facebook was launched, a mere 16 years ago, if you can believe it. Facebook is definitely a teenager, no doubt about it. So I've had experience in different media influences in those 35 years. I've seen the shifts of, or there are dramatic shifts of media power. I've seen media giants be the main gatekeepers to most of our information sharing in our social change movements through a very strong advertising model. And I've seen these giants crumble very quickly, unbelievably quickly over the last 5 years. And I've watched as new media have risen quickly in the space that has opened up and disappeared even faster. I've seen trust dramatically broken with the weaponizing of social media and Facebook and Reddit and many others. And I've seen our social purpose organizations over the last 20 years believe more and more and more about technology and media built with I believe, a false premise that making more information available would do our cultural work. And I think now we know with the kind of polarization we're seeing this is just not true. And the good news is that I've seen the cracks open for the rise of our grassroots movement. And I have to say, this is kind of a back to the future moment for me, because in those 35 years, the grassroots movement, it was really what I saw before the internet. I experienced in my early years how my grandparents organized for social change. It was always about trusted peer networks and often organizing in their unions or workplace or place of worship in their communities and neighborhoods. And I'm now seeing quite dramatically the shift back to this grassroots power and ownership to where it has really always been in telling our own stories of lived experience and shaping the policies we need and the change we want. So the future is human. We are moving away from mechanistic engagement to a far more personal touch and relationship building. And the inspiration for this presentation, I have to say, are a group of over 35,000 mothers of diverse heritage caring for young children across Canada, mostly in suburban and rural communities. They taught me really everything I'm expressing in this presentation. The presentation is in honor of their incredible insights. I spent the last 3 years in deep listening to their worldview and their way of working and connecting. And they really orientated my focus away from my great dis-ease with the way that media was moving, or the state of media, to where a place I feel really confident in the future as human. This really flows from a shared understanding and awareness that drives all of our grassroots movements, which is the need for a good life, to ensure that we can care for the people on the planet we love. So let's get to the lay of the land of the current state of media. Mentors, as I mentioned with Al and Vicky, have played a big role in my life. And I've been really blessed with elders growing up in a large, very opinionated extended family. So when I found myself in a lunchroom at a conference with one other person who looked very familiar, and as I walked closer to her, I saw that it was Arianna Huffington of the Huffington Post world. She is a massive media trendsetter. And I can go on, if I had more time, on the long list of what this powerful woman did in transitioning media. But she's a forecaster. She really sees where media trends are. So when I went up to her, I asked her if she would answer a question: where does she feel the media is heading? And at this time, it was about 12 years ago that I had this exchange with her. And she said, well, before she said classic Arianna Huffington, well, darling, sit down and let me tell you all about it. She said, we are moving very quickly from broadcast media, meaning what she calls attention deficit disorder. And I love this because if you can imagine mainstream media, it's really kind of a dog's breakfast when you open up your app, or even if you're still looking at newspapers, you get what the media decides it wants to show you. And it could be, the update on the potential peaceful transfer of presidential power in the US, or it could be about season 4 of The Crown capturing, the details of Diana's wedding dress. You do not know what you're going to get. The media will tell you what you're going to get. And she said, this is like forcing everybody to be everything all over the place. And it's very, very hard to focus on the areas that are priorities in your own life. So she said what we're moving from is that kind of broadcast media to the polar opposite, which is media controlled by individuals who have a very specific area of interest. So technology has allowed that niche audiences can cluster together and decide on whatever they want to focus their attention on. And she called this obsessive compulsive disorder. Meaning we can get so narrow in our thinking about media and information that we lose sight of a bigger lens. And she was sort of referencing how a strength overused becomes a weakness. Let me give you an example. These passionate communities, as she said, there's a strength and weakness associated. Let's first focus on the strength. I'm wondering if people in the room, in our virtual room, have visited the Cyclades Islands of Greece. I haven't, but apparently they're incredible. They're islands formed by volcanic activity millions of years ago, and they have a similar landscape and climate, and yet they are all very different. Over the years, each tiny island developed its own microculture: food, art, history, customs, and stories. They're an endless source of local pride. You can literally visit 25 islands and find 25 fascinating microcultures. And that is a depiction of our modern, technological-driven media. It's allowing people to self-organize in very short time into like-minded islands. They're unique places of belonging, support, shared values, and community of pride, and they are bonds of trust. But here's the catch. They are wary, these islands, of strangers. And it is a growing wariness of others. And this is where their strength becomes a weakness. And we're seeing it everywhere. And I'll give you a really visceral example of this. 2 years ago, Twitter did kind of an emotional map. And what they did was kind of a heat map of emotional tweets that express moral outrage. And as you can see very clearly, there are 2 bubbles of that moral outrage where people are internally talking to each other and reinforcing their mindsets, and very little sharing is happening between the 2. This is creating the dramatic polarization that we're seeing across democratic countries the world over. And it's wreaking havoc in our civic processes, and it's reinforcing, it's creating deeper and deeper and deeper divides. Yet when we look at our own neighbors and our conversations across political perspectives, we actually see Canadians are very much in the middle. And because of the structure of media, they're feeling very discounted and unheard. It's like the loudest voice and the most morally outraged voice is heard. And this is creating deep distrust. And there is a really important research piece, if you have a chance to look at. It's called Edelman Trust Barometer. It is effectively a research firm that goes around the world to gauge citizens' trust in their stakeholders. And about 3 years ago, in 2017, they were shocked to find that Canada, which was considered in the global trust barometer at the very top of trust in citizens in their institution, they found we had dramatically dropped. Where after in 2018, we went under the threshold of trust, and we are now seen in this research as a country who distrust our institutions, our businesses, our media, our government, and now of late, our NGOs. This is a challenge because if media throughout human history has really been seen as developing the mechanism to scale stories that demonstrate the why, what, and how of resilience, if we don't trust the storytellers, which because of media have been largely stakeholders, then we are actually learning how to distrust each other. We no longer have the kinds of stories that are shared to have a collective consciousness of what it means to be Canadians and what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. We are now islands that don't want visitors to share our culture or our lived experience. And in turn, we're not able to have the opportunity to integrate new worldviews brought by these visitors who also want to become part of our community. Without trust, there is very little chance for collective response in this important reset era. This is what a cultural crisis looks like. But as we know, every cultural crisis is about shifting power. And this is the good news story. Because as media stakeholders, largely business and government who shape information and design and develop policy, they are no longer able to use the mechanisms of media to have top-down information shared with citizens. Rather, they're recognizing that these islands are owned by the individuals, by the residents. And it is very, very difficult now to actually have a broadcast message to these islands. So businesses do not own their brands. They're, in fact, the latest research is that businesses are not able to reach 3/4 of their consumers. It's unbelievable when you think about all the advertising that we've been lived through in the last decade. They literally cannot speak directly to their consumer. Government does not own their policies. Citizens decide. Nothing is, citizens decide what they want to be a part of. Academia are not seen as the experts. Citizens decide what is relevant. NGOs do not own their issues. Citizens set their priorities. Media do not own their platforms. Passionate citizens do. So this is where the disability movement, who through concentric circles of loved ones is making up 2/3 of Canadians and 4/7 of the global population. If we think about disability movement as being actually maybe call it the atmosphere around, the connected atmosphere around these islands, you are starting to see what a force this community has. Because if government is not able to reach citizens, they are looking for a bridge, an important bridge that has the trust and has the attention of 2/3 of citizens. So it's no longer a moment where we're looking to broken media systems to tell our stories. We actually now have a pull culture of decision makers wanting access to the hearts and minds of the individuals and communities that make up our movements. So this is what I call the art and science of media, because the art is what I have learned from 35 women from across the country on the topic of climate change, is that in order to earn the greatest need that media has is our attention. That's what the overarching role of media is to capture the attention and grow an audience. And so in order for that to happen, for audiences to give their scarcest commodity, their time, their voice, and their assets, these women who I worked with told me that there are 4 tenets that have to be part of this kind of collective of media, of a media movement. And that is a sense of belonging, peer-to-peer relationships, an ability to have open and authentic conversation, and a sense of agency or purpose. Does this sound like your organization, your movement? Belonging. Mothers taught us that they are feeling incredibly isolated across our country, and that they look to media to break their isolation. But they're looking to media that connect them to the people who share their lived experience. This is not broadcast media. This is not mainstream media. This is not highly polarizing media. This is a media that creates a sense of a caring community that will pay attention to their interests and provide them with the opportunity to share their stories. The second is peer-to-peer. This is another back to the future moment. Peers have always been where we garnered insights to make sense of a changing world. Peers are the most trustworthy source of new information and new behaviors. Peers have a deep understanding of a shared life of similar experience. And these exchanges amongst peers are an order of magnitude more effective than expert top-down instructions. A media that links peers with each other is a media that has deep power and force. Conversation. Really, to gather people's attention, you have to know you have things to discuss together that's relevant to your life. These are stories that are developed together. It is not a packaged story of beginning, middle, and end. It's a co-designed experience amongst peers, amongst communities. And the disability movement is made up of vast interests and millions of points of content to share with each other. And you have an entire 2/3 of the Canadian population leaning in to want to be part of that conversation, and who are looking for meaning in their life, knowing that their lives matter. In this case, with the disability movement media, there is a need to change, to make things better, to ensure a good life. So as audiences turn away from traditional sources of media, have deep distrust in the kind of weaponizing of social media, they are looking deeply for this movement media. Connecting, building the connective tissue or the water supply amongst the islands. These are the 4 tenets, and it's very, very hard to find a media that has these 4 tenets. The disability movement has it. Now the science. What tends to happen with our communities in the social change is that we have the content and the stories, but we don't actually develop the systems that allow for consistency and replication and ability to reinforce the messages that are shared. And this is the area that my agency, Social Currents, is really focused at with the social movements, is that we have to act like a media in order to be a media. If you go into a media room, essentially all the content has been banked 3 to 6 months ahead of time. 75% of that content is managed across a 2 to 3 year space. Only 25% is actually reactive. And that tends to be the 25% that all of the NGOs or social purpose groups try to garner the attention of the media. It's an op-ed piece, etc. The science of media requires a deep understanding of audience segmentation, knowing your movement and your individual and collective islands within your movement. What are the professions? What are the themes? What are the age groups? What's the sexual orientations? What are the culture of origins, the political leanings? All of these pieces can't be monolith. We need to be looking very deeply at what those audience, individuals, and clusters are seeking from a disability movement and be able to share that information in a way that is clearly organized to ensure that many platforms are receiving it. Rebecca, I see that time is of the essence. Is that right?
I think you're good. You've 2 or 3 more slides left.
Sure. So I'll skip that slide here. So essentially what we want to do as a media is identify exactly as media does. Who are your influencers? In the case of traditional media, it has always been, not always been, but the decision makers, the people with power, who have been able to shape the policy and information that then goes through a very narrow funnel out to audiences. In this case, with grassroots movements, it's the people who are part of the movement that are the influencers. These are the people with the lived experience, with the relationships, who understand the stories and understand the collective narrative of the disability movement and understand the collective action that can speak to very specific areas of interest. Essentially, you have, with these movements, a challenge of abundance because you have so many influencers. And that's why it's so important to have the back end to support how these influencers can tell their story and ensure that one story can get shared amongst a host of different islands. The other is, and this is probably the most critical issue, is distributed platforms. Generally in the social change movement, we're very good at creating content, but then we go shopping for where it can be placed. Within the disability movement are platforms that we all have access to and that we all have influence over. If we stop for a minute, and I did it this morning, I started jotting down platforms. When I mean this, I mean my own Facebook account or a newsletter that I produce for different organizations, or a particular area. I love dance, and so a number of different platforms that I actually do dancing at home through the pandemic. I listed in literally 3 minutes 25 platforms that I know I personally could have content from a movement that I support placed on those platforms. So when you start scoping the breadth of the distributed platforms where the disability movement content could be placed, you will see as many platforms likely as people in your movement. It is an incredible resource. And of course, the stories. I won't spend time on this. You know the deep richness of the stories that you have to share. Every individual, if they just told one story in the movement and we distributed it on a fraction of the platforms that you have access to, would impact culture and would have a direct impact on the Canadian disability benefit shift that you're looking for right now. And behind all of this, and I won't go too deeply in this, is the new tools that are accessible to create these media systems. If you think about the history of media, the tools have always been in the hands of the power. When we think about the printing press, that was really held in the power of the Catholic Church. If we looked at newspapers, it was in the power of the business leaders who had the ability to garner business advertising. If we look at social media, it's largely in the hands of the people that are developing the algorithms. But when we look at the distributed networks, the influencers and the stories and the tools to organize across 2 to 3 years, we are now talking about the real force of the media. So the disability movement is a media. And the statement, "Nothing about us without us," this frame sums up what a media is. It holds the core tenets of belonging, connection, storytelling. It directs what's essential. It requests of people their time and voice in their action. Just in the last week, I had 5 clients here that I was doing this presentation. And these were 5 clients across the climate change, the opiate crisis, access to parks, you name it. They said, is there a way for us to engage the disability movement? These are these platforms who are waiting for your voices and your stories, because they too have direct need to be part of your movement. So I'll just make a last statement, which is you're in good company. I use Al Jazeera as an example that could mirror the success that is waiting for the disability movement media. This is a trusted, smart, whole system media whose origins was to fill the tremendous gap of fair representation of the Middle East and the world, with an intention of intersecting religion and social justice with an open mind. They knew they had a massive audience. They were tired of trying to get their stories into others who own media. They wanted the lived experience of their audience to become the media. They also knew that decision makers needed access to this audience. And so they shaped how that interchange would happen. In turn, they have been able to shift mindsets of the Middle East and its diverse populations with a more enlightened understanding. And they are an example of what is waiting for the disability movement in designing itself with the art and science. So my final word is, you may know or you may not know that you are currently a media in the awakening moment. Thank you. Rebecca, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Delyse. And Aaron has some words, and we'll be presenting the drawing that he and Liz have been working on. Go ahead, Aaron. Thank you, Delyse.
Okay, great. And Liz is here too. So usually Liz and I work together. We work together and do tandem graphic recording, and there's her recording. Because of COVID, we're in separate places today. Liz, can you keep holding it up? Can you hold up your drawing? And hold it still? There you go. So we'll be sending these out to people later. Plan has been sending them out in various ways. And so it's exciting to be working together in these great conversations. I particularly enjoyed this one. I feel like I didn't even know I was waiting for it. We have so many conversations about so many things, and this one is kind of off to the edge, but as Delyse has kind of led us through it, it seems like it's closer and closer and more important to some of the things we've been doing. I really liked the idea of these islands, and I think, Liz, do you agree that the concept of these islands of difference, kind of working against new ideas, and waiting for some way to bring things together is a good concept?
Yeah, I totally agree on that.
Yeah, yeah. And we really like Greek
Remind
islands
me of
too.
that, Aaron. Sorry.
But we really like Greek islands too.
Yeah. You know what really, sorry.
No, go.
You know what really reminds me of that? It's a song. You probably know it.
Okay.
Together from the Beatles.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so Delyse is talking about things like the Come Together song from the Beatles, where we're finding new ways to bring people together and be part of a media, be a controlling part.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked the thing that she was saying about the power of the movement in terms of like major influences, but also individual stories. And as Liz and I have been working for the last 5 or 6 years, yeah, hold still. As Liz and I have been working, you got the Twitter bird, good. As Liz and I have been working together for the last 4 or 5 years, talking to self-advocates, mostly with intellectual disabilities, they really want to tell their stories. We've been so many places with so many groups, and they're waiting for us to walk into the room so they can tell us their stories. And one of the things that Delyse said that I really loved was that if everyone tells one story about their movement, the whole thing will move forward and the world will change. That's a great idea, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to talk to Rebecca about that. On the chat, there's a conversation about how we need to have more conversations about this, and people are organizing the next conversation already. And I really hope to be part of that because I think this is so exciting, Delyse. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience and all of the latest findings. I think one of my favorite parts was the way that you've related these big ideas to these sort of generational ideas of what the grandmothers did when they came together, and how this is not stuff that is new to us. It's not that we don't know how to do it. We do know how to do it, and we can. We just need some leadership, and that's happening right here, right now, as we're watching it. Liz, any last words?
Should I explain this or?
Sure.
So far I've done a whole lot of different things. Some of the speakers, this lady here, and then the one after that one, and then I did the Tweety bird with the different colors in it.
Yeah.
And 2 hands touching with power things coming out of it. The Facebook media, family, friends. We're back on the top there. A teenager.
Okay. Can you hold it? Can you hold it right up in front of you?
A guy going like this is like a prime minister. He's saying democracy.
Great. Oh, and you got Rabia's in there. That's great.
Yeah. And the plan. I put down the plan. And belonging. And we are media. And oh yeah, my way of listening is headphones.
Yeah, that's one of the individual stories, right?
Yeah.
So Rebecca, I think our time is up.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Thank you so much, Liz and Aaron. I can't wait for an opportunity to see those pictures closer up. And Delyse, thank you for sharing, and Aaron and Liz for adding to that. We've been talking about the power of stories and how each one of us has people that influence us, and we have people that we influence. And two people who have had a very significant influence in my life in the last several months since I began to know about their stories are Mian Ziv and Jonathan Marchand. And they're both with us today to share a bit of their stories with us. So at this point, I'm very happy to welcome Mian Ziv with us today. And Mian, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work and the influence that you're having in the communities that you're in. So thanks, Mian.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Wow, this has been one of the best events that I've been a part of in quite a while. So thank you all for your insights and the presentations that we've had an opportunity to listen to, Delyse and Liz, and thank you. This has been amazing so far. What I want to do with my time with you is to maybe lead you through a bit of a case study and talk to you about my experience and what we have been attempting to do at Access Now, and how it very much speaks to this message of grassroots media to vocalize a movement. So a bit about me. I'm Mian. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I have two younger sisters. And there's a cat right next to me right now, and she is very much begging for attention. So apologies if she like climbs up onto the screen or like you hear scratching noises. That's what's going on in this room. I grew up with a disability. I have a type of muscular dystrophy, and I've used a wheelchair throughout my life. And early on, I very much believed in the power of storytelling because I grew up kind of in a creative household. So I was studying theater through high school. I took art classes when I was a kid, and then into university, studied radio and television, and did a master's in digital media. So I've actually spent pretty much my whole life thinking about storytelling. And something that I realized, I would say in high school, the first thing that really drew me to finding the right medium to tell my story, before I even knew that that's what I was doing, was photography. And I noticed actually in the chat that somebody mentioned that they were a photographer and that they wanted to contribute to the movement through that. And that's very much where my journey began. I started just by taking photos of people in my life and places I was visiting, and was really inspired by how I could use that medium to connect with people and to share a perspective that was difficult for me at the time to articulate into words. And that it allowed for interpretation, and it allowed for people to come to a conversation without realizing that that's actually what was happening. When I look at it now, I realize that what was happening as I worked as a photographer. So I started in high school, went into university for radio and television, and continued to take photos. While I was doing that, and often instead of spending as much time on my assignments, I was reaching out to people and building a network. And by the time I graduated in my undergrad, I was, working for the school and taking photos of some of my prof's kids for headshots, and did a few media campaigns for the university, and basically graduated into my career. And early on, I realized that there was interest in my story. And the reason was that I didn't look like or represent the assumption of a photographer that people had assumed me to be. I was a woman sitting on a wheelchair, about 19 years old, working in fashion, portraiture, and documentary work. And that is not the ideal person you would expect to see in that role. And so a lot of people were scared of that, but a lot of people were really excited to understand how is she doing what she's doing. My assumptions of disability don't connect with the work that I'm seeing online or in her portfolio or in that campaign that I saw. So how is it possible? Is there somebody else taking the pictures? People actually ask me all kinds of questions. And the coolest thing about that was I realized that I was finding a voice as an advocate. And that to me was one of the main reasons that I was so drawn to photography, was that I wanted to carve out a space for myself that could break down the barriers to people's assumptions about what it means to be a photographer, what kind of person works in the fashion industry. And I wanted disability to be there. And so because I didn't see anybody else doing it who looked like me at the time in Toronto, I just was like, okay, I'm going to be that person. And hopefully that creates enough awareness around me that other people would be more open and accepting of different types of perspectives that would be open to this kind of work. So that was kind of working. It's very hard. And then the media, mainstream media, got caught of my story. And, you know, it started with local TV. Like I remember I did a little piece for Rogers. And then, you know, I did another piece with Bell, which was much bigger. I did some pieces with MTV. And larger media with larger audiences started finding me. And then we did a piece with a couple different companies, brands that put a lot of money into marketing the story. And I felt this weird dissonance happening where people were telling my story. And I was excited because now more awareness was being given, but the story wasn't accurate because it had now been worked and told through the lens of someone who didn't understand disability, with limited language to define my perspective and limited experience within a world that was so familiar to me. So headlines would read things like disabled photographer, you know, achieves da-da despite of her disability, or, you know, this interesting, actually ableist language was coming through, which was so bizarre to me because even the journalists had been there with the best of intentions to tell my story, to get the news out, to create awareness, but they'd done it in a way that was actually harmful to the work that I was trying to create. And so, you know, flash forward to today, 2020, I started in, I don't know, 2010 maybe, when I was working full-time as a photographer. And 10 years later now, I've really shifted my focus. I was really drawn to this concept of advocacy and started focusing my time on a digital platform that could help people understand my perspective in a different way. And started still as my singular voice. So I built a company, a tech company in my master's program called Access Now. And at the time, I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I was just working on a project to solve my own need, which was every time I go somewhere, I don't know if it's accessible for me. Every time I call someone to find out if it's accessible for me, they don't actually know. I'll show up at a hotel in New York City with my luggage after my wheelchair was lost for a few hours, and finally show up, and there are 5 steps to the entrance, even though I called and spent hours researching, and for some reason we still don't have basic answers. So that was the frustration that I started focusing on, the navigation of the world. And instead of spending my time convincing people that I was you know, someone who should be hired, I was spending all my time trying to even get to the room to convince them. So what I did was I started sharing information on a map, rating places based on accessibility from my own perspective. This place has a ramp. This place has an accessible washroom. This place, you know, has 3 steps to the entrance. And by doing that, I started seeing instances of accessibility that showed up on a map that defined my own perspective. And then I shared that map with a few of my friends, and they did the same thing. And a few of those friends shared it with a few other people. And before I knew it, we had a platform that was vocalizing unique perspectives from people with lived experience of disability geographically. So I'm going to share with you while I'm talking just an image of the map. And I noticed actually somebody beat me to it. They put it in the chat. I was going to do the same thing. But what you will see here is a map of Toronto that has red, yellow, and green pins. And each of these locations represents an instance in which someone has shared their own perspective about the accessibility of a place. And I can open them, but I'm not going to do that yet. And if you look around, you could see like this is downtown Toronto. This is where, you know, I live and where Access Now was started. And, you know, it started with just me, but then more people started sharing information on the platform. And as you zoom out, and it might be a little bit slow because I'm screen sharing it, you start to see what the power of individual stories can do when you contribute them through a grassroots platform that vocalizes a specific focus, that being accessibility in the built environment. That was really our focus and remains to be our focus. And initially it started with just me and my voice as a wheelchair user. And soon we heard from other people who were sharing feedback and requests for other types of information that they wanted the platform to allow them to do. So could you share information about scent-free spaces? Could I tag a place that is has gender-neutral washrooms? Or what about places that offer sign language interpretation? Or places that I might actually access a Braille menu in a restaurant, for example. And hopefully you're following along the screen as I zoom out pretty slowly right now, but I'm doing it on purpose. And what I'm showing you on the screen right now is instances in which people have contributed to one platform, which is very much a disability media, to highlight the good, the not so good, and areas that need work when it comes to accessibility of the built environment. And how, when you look at that on a global scale, that's where you start to recognize exactly the types of things that Delyse was speaking about. The power of the individual voice, the focus around a specific effort, a shared belief system, things that are accessible, being places that are welcoming, barrier-free from a personal perspective. And what happens when you collectively contribute that buy-in, those shared beliefs, onto a platform that can then be shared and amplified with the world. We don't really tell anybody what to say, what to do. We've created a tool, and the goal of the tool is to allow people to share whatever is meaningful to them. And this is where, to me, Access Now is really exciting as a platform to vocalize this kind of grassroots media for a movement that we speak about. You know, I know nothing about Michigan, but I can connect to somebody else's voice and see what they have shared and what matters to them about that experience. And then I can go further and take their listing on Access Now. And this is the website, but you can also do it online on our app. And I can tweet that, and I can share that then and amplify somebody else's voice. To me, this was, oh, sorry, something just happened to my screen. Here we are. Okay, I stopped the screen share. To me, this was a moment where I realized the power that we have as a grassroots community to vocalize issues that we collectively agree on and share. Not every person with a disability has the same experience. In fact, disability is very nuanced and personal. You might go through a period of time where you have a temporary disability. Does that mean that you're less worthy of sharing? You might go through a time where you know somebody who has a disability. Does that mean that you can't be part of the movement? And I think what we've done at Access Now is try and open it enough to be accessible and to build a sense of trust, where we've created a platform that just allows people to share their own voices. For me, this is one of the most important shifts, is because when I started my work, I allowed my story to be told by mainstream media, and I put my trust in that. And the story that came back was not the story that was authentic or reflective. And that's not bad. We still need to work with those channels, but can we find ways to amplify voices that come from lived experience? Where are the journalists? Where are the photographers? Where are the artists? Where are the politicians with disabilities to contribute to shaping that story? And I think for me, that's one of the most important parts of building a movement, any movement, is that it's authentic to the people who that movement represents. It cannot be one or two or a few people who get on a podium and speak on behalf of everyone. I think for it to be truly effective, we must use grassroots platforms and tools and social media to amplify each other's stories and bring ourselves to a sense of kind of unification. So I just sent the link. If you want to play around with it while I finish my talk, you're welcome to do that. You could also very quickly create an account and even try adding your own listing for a place and see how that makes you feel. So now I'm just going to shift to another case study, just to kind of think things through on a different way. At Access Now, we do this a lot. So we run map missions, we bring people together. Now virtually, we do kind of online sessions, and then people use the platform to go out. The platform is there as a tool for other people to share, for other people to do their own work. And one of the most exciting things for me to do is to hear other people's stories of how they're using the platform to do their own work. It is not for Access Now to come and say, you have to do it this way. Or it's not my job to come and say, hey, you person out there with your own experience, this is what you need to do. But for every person to find what they can bring to a collective shared kind of cacophony of voices that have a similar focus and goal. In our case, it's really about breaking barriers to the built environment, creating awareness, and also inviting partners or governments to take part in this, to realize their responsibility to actually remove some of those barriers, to amplify some of the work that's coming from people's kind of just lived experiences and what they have to share. And I think there's an interesting kind of tension, if you look even just at the map, between accessible places, places of optimism and celebration, and places that are not accessible. And often I think, when we talk about grassroots movement, there is an undertone of anger that comes through, and it scares people, and it often intimidates people into not wanting to come into the conversation and take part. I understand that anger because I go through it a lot. When you feel that you have been misunderstood, when your rights have not been heard, when you are facing challenges to equity, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of the different barriers that people with disabilities and families and friends experience, there is anger there. Why? It's not fair. How do we then use that as a vehicle to share an authentic story, to talk about injustice, but in a way that is a call to action for people to take part, instead of be so scared of that conversation that they back out of the room. So just I'm going to kind of close because I know we're short on time, but recently, just about a week ago, American Airlines put out this new policy that they were no longer going to accept power wheelchairs that were over 300 pounds because there was so much damage, and they thought that it was in the best interest of people with disabilities to not fly on American Airlines if their power wheelchairs were over 300 pounds. Instead of finding a way to solve the problem, they just erased the people who present that challenge. And to me, that was a very discriminatory policy. And I was very angry, and also felt kind of like personally attacked by it. I have a power wheelchair that's over 300 pounds. So why are my rights now taken away? And why am I no longer seen as a valid customer? In kind of an angry rant, I went on Twitter and started talking about my experience, as I often do. And other people started sharing their own perspectives. There's a hashtag that was created called Crip American Air, where people started sharing, their nightmare stories of flying with American Airlines and some of the challenges that have happened, broken wheelchairs, really bad customer care policies, overall just kind of an amplification of stories that were unique to people that tied back to this concept of American Airlines being unjust towards people with disabilities. So I went on change.org and I created a petition that basically just said that American Airlines had done this, and that we demanded the reversal of the discriminatory policy, and further that American Airlines needed to consult with people with disabilities the next time that they were going to put in place any new policy or change to the way that they did their business. And that was about a week ago. And now we've got over 7,000 signatures on this petition. And we've also got American Airlines responding through mainstream media, not directly to us, talking about how they have reconsidered the policy and are investigating internally how they might change this. With enough pressure, I fully believe that this policy, just a tiny little moment of advocacy, can change. There's the link if you're interested. And it just shows that, to Delyse's point, there are many different platforms that we can use to vocalize components of the movement. This is a very specific issue. This is not to do anything with kind of disability benefit or basic income for people with disabilities. Very kind of isolated moment in time. But the ability to rally around a concept, but not overly define for people what needs to be said or how people need to behave without ownership of a concept. I think we have a lot of potential to gain trust within our own community, where people have an opportunity to feel that their voices are as valid as others, that it's not, for example, and this is something I say kind of at Access Now all the time, is I don't want this to be the Mian show. I don't want to be the only voice that's heard or represented. But that by creating a platform where the goal is to amplify each other's voices with a kind of shared vision, I really believe this is the next frontier. I really do. And I think that's why we're all here. And by finding the right tools with enough persistence, and persistence is key, enough kind of loud vocalized calls to action, I do believe that this is totally possible, and that this is the future of the disability movement, is through grassroots platforms, is through platforms that vocalize unique voices and all geared towards a specific focused shared direction.
Yeah. Wow.
That's the end of my talk. I know I'm over time. I'm really sorry. But I shared a little bit in terms of links. And if you're interested in getting involved more in Access Now or in the petition or anything else, please join. Please do. I'd love to hear from you all. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mian. We love hearing your stories and your ideas. And sometimes when we're on these calls, an hour and a half goes by so quickly. I think I'm not the only one who wants to continue the conversation. And the good news is that there's lots of opportunities for us to continue the conversation in the next days and weeks. And I want to say thank you on behalf of us all, Mian, for being here. Um, as we wrap up our time today, I want to invite Jonathan Marchand back spotlighted with me. And hi, Jonathan, thanks for being here. We're looking forward to the day where we can hear your full story and hear what happens when you have influence and when you don't. And I know that right now you're having an incredible amount of influence. And so while we don't have time to get into the full story, I wonder if you could just take 2 or 3 minutes and react to what you've heard today. What do you think about all of this?
Yeah, well, by all means necessary, we need to take our rightful place in Canadian society. We need to build a movement. It's incredibly important. That's what we're trying to do in Quebec. We did some direct action throughout the summer to get our voices heard. My experience is that we need to use a full range of action to get to our goals. So we need to use the media, that's very important. We need to be politically active as well. We need to use all the administrative tools that we have. We need to use the courts as well, and we need to use direct action as well. And that's the key. So, with a multi-pronged approach, we can reach our goals and to be recognized and to be included in Canadian society. There's We need to use all means necessary to get there, and everything needs to be on the table. That's my experience. If you only focus on the media, that's not enough. You need to take control of the narrative. You need to be heard and not let the journalists write your story for yourself. And that's the way forward, I think.
Last week, we heard from Peter McLeod about the importance of us working together as people with disabilities and community to support government and create the disability benefit that we need and want. And these ideas today about how we all have a story and how we have an incredible amount of influence is the way that that will happen. So thank you, Jonathan, for those comments. And as we wrap up, Rabia, I know that you will call us to action and let us know what we need to do next. So Rabia will have the last word today.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm a little disjointed here. Excuse my mask and earpiece and all that. Challenging times under COVID, but challenging and also filled with opportunities. So today we've talked about power, the power of storytelling, the power of defining a single story when it comes to disability, coming up with that narrative, packaging it and putting it out there, pushing it out there, insisting that people hear our story and hear our voice and recognize that there's nothing about us without us, that we in fact have a single story to tell. And that story is about barriers. And that story demands a resolution. And that resolution is going to come together with all of us, all people with disabilities, regardless of region, of race, of culture, of language, of ethnicity, of background, regardless of anything that makes us unique and different, but all about what binds us together in common. We are, in fact, going to change the world. We are going to create the world we are imagining and envisioning. It is time for this movement to galvanize and to be heard. Let's hear, listen, voice, and be heard today and onward. We have a mission and we have a shared vision. We just need to articulate it, and we need to come together. There is nothing about us without us. Let's continue the conversation and let's build a national movement that improves quality of life of every Canadian living with a disability and their families. 22% of us have disabilities, and another at least 40% of us live with someone with a disability. We are not the minority, we are the majority. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabia, and for being part of our session today. We'll gather again next Thursday. You will, in the next couple of hours, receive some resources for us and a survey as well. Please let us know what you think and what your responses to this are. And on behalf of all of the organizations that have worked together to put this on, you'll see the logos on the screen. I want to say thank you for creating this time together. And I wish you all a great week, and we'll see you back next Thursday.